Hi Gaon. I am Jackaroo Turu, and on this channel I talk about Australian Aboriginal languages, predominantly the Pama-Nyungan ones. Predominantly, but not exclusively. So I have been doing a series where I have been looking at Pama-Nyungan verbs in Pama-Nyungan languages, and to be more specific, the focus has been on this first part of the verb. Now I thought we'd move on to the second part, which is within parentheses. Why is it within parentheses? Well, C stands for conjugation. And while it is a fact that most Pama-Nyungan languages have verbal conjugations, and this is common in languages in general all over the world, so that is not surprising. So most Pama-Nyungan languages have verbal conjugations, but only some languages have clear conjugational markers that are always used. So that is why the C is within parentheses. So what is conjugation? Conjugation is a classical term for a group of verbs that take the same or at least a similar conjugational pattern, which is to say that they take the same or similar tense, aspect, and mood endings. Similar meaning similar in shape in this context. Yes, classical Latin is considered to have 4 verbal conjugations. So regular verbs are divided into 4 conjugations based on how they inflect. Students of Spanish will know that there are 3 conjugations in that language, and in the infinitive forms, the verbs in the 3 conjugations end with AR, ER, or IR. These two are actually fairly similar to each other, and this one is distinct. But the forms are clearly different in the second person plural. Second person plural, which I should mention, is used mostly in Europe, in European Spanish, not so much in Latin America. But if we look at the second person plural present tense, we have 3 different verbs here: hablais, coméis, and vivís. You, plural, talk, eat, and live. And in the second person plural imperative, which is used when you're telling more than one person to do something, we get the following forms with the same verbs: hablad, comed, and vivid. Yes. And my native language, Swedish, is also considered to have 4 verbal conjugations, like Latin. So Swedish verbs are grouped. Let's go with grouped. I lost the word I was going to say. Grouped into 4 different conjugations. But in Pama-Nyungan languages then, most languages do have conjugations and only a few lack them. And these are languages that are spread out in the center and the eastern part of Australia. And McGregor, 2002, he lists these examples. So we have the language Arunda in the center of Australia. See my video about Arunda phonology. We have these languages which are found east of center, so to speak, Pita Pita, Dieri, and Arabana. And we have two languages along the east coast, Panjalung and Kumbaingir. Kumbaingir. It's better. Yes. So what these languages have in common, by the way, is that they all have lots of verb roots. Lots and lots of verb roots. And all the verbs then in these languages take the same set of tense, aspect, and mood endings. Yes, so Dixon, in his book The Languages of Australia in 1980, he divides Pama-Nyungan languages with verbal conjugations into these three groups. First, we have languages with one open conjugation, which is not to say that the languages have only one conjugation. Here we exemplify with the Western Desert language, spoken in a huge area in Australia's Western Desert, hence the name. Originally there were around 20 dialects. Not all of them are alive today, but this is still one of Australia's biggest indigenous languages when it comes to the number of speakers. And the Western Desert is located in the eastern half, as it so happens, of Western Australia, which is still on the western side of the continent. So most of the Western Desert dialects have 4 conjugations, but 3 of them are closed with limited membership. So closed meaning they don't accept new members, for example when verbs are borrowed from other languages. But there is one big and open conjugation. So these languages are found in the Western Desert, and in the north of Australia we find these languages stretching out to the west coast. Nyangomada is the language that reaches the west coast, and it also has these 4 conjugations, one of which being open. And as it so happens, this is what we also find in Swedish. 4 verb conjugations, and one is open and accepts new members. So that's where all borrowed and new verbs end up, and we have 3 examples here of verbs that come from English. So we have googla, to Google or to search the web. These are the infinitives. We have reiva, to rave, in this case meaning to attend a rave party. And this one is a bit unexpected, I think. This was very popular among young people 20 years ago. All people were softa all the time. And this is unexpected because this obviously comes from English soft. So what does a verb softa mean? Well, it means to chill. So how do you get the sense to chill from English soft? I don't know, and because of that I never used this verb myself. I don't know if young people are softa anymore these days. I haven't heard it so much in recent years, but that may also be connected to the fact that I'm not as young as I was 20 years ago, so who knows? Anyway, moving on to languages with 2 open conjugations. And these are in fact the big majority of Pama-Nyungan languages. and they are found west and east of this area. These languages have between 2 and 6 conjugations, and 2 of them are big then and open, and the rest of them are small and closed conjugations. And here we find the Ngara, the language I have studied, and its neighboring language Nyamal. And both of these languages actually only have 2 conjugations, 2 big ones. They both neighbor the Nyangomara language, but when it comes to verbs, the verbs are arranged or grouped into conjugations differently then. Yes, so the big majority. Close to the Pama-Nyungan, non-Pama-Nyungan boundary in northern and northwestern Australia, we also find languages that only have closed conjugations, so no new verbs come in. And these languages have between 4 and 6 conjugations. So how does that work, that no new verbs come in? Well, these languages are all verb classifying languages. And when I say that no new verbs come in, I mean inflecting verbs in this case. There are loan words that come in as uninflecting verbs, but no new inflecting verbs are acceptable or accepted. Here we find languages belonging to the following Pama-Nyungan subgroups: Marngo, Ngombinyaba, and Yolngo. Nyangomara is a Marngo language, and so obviously here there are other Marngo languages than Nyangomara that are found here. A few examples are Gorinji and Walberi in north-central Australia, which are both Ngombinyaba languages, and Yolngo and Jabo, a dual dialect, which is a Yolngo language, is what I should say. So last in this video, I'd like to ask the question, is there a correlation between conjugation, the conjugation a verb belongs to, and its transitivity value? And in this context, I would like to discuss intransitive and transitive verbs. Intransitive verbs that only need a subject to be understandable. So, for example, Carl sleeps. And transitive verbs that also take a direct object. So, Carl kicks the ball. Subject, verb, direct object. And the answer is that yes, there is a correlation, but usually it's a statistical one rather than an absolute one. By the way, in this context, I should probably mention that Australian Aboriginal languages usually have a few, but only a few detransitive verbs. Those are verbs that take a subject, a direct object, and an indirect object. So, Carl gives the pot to Grandma. Yes, in northwestern Australia, languages also have verbs that are called semi-transitive. But I feel that that is a topic for another video. So anyway, there is a correlation, and it is a statistical one, meaning that the majority of the verbs in one conjugation have one transitivity value, while remaining verbs have the other. So if we first look at the Jabu, which is part of the complicated dialect cluster up in Arnhem Land in Australia's Northern Territory, we find 4 conjugations. We first have the zero conjugation, in which 75% of known verbs are intransitive. And as you can see, in remaining conjugations, the l, and n conjugations, the majority of the verbs are instead transitive. So to be specific, 80, 87 and 77% of the verbs. Moving on to example language number 2. Ingada, of the Gascoyne region of Western Australia. Ingada is probably extinct these days. The last speakers have probably died. But anyway, we find 2 conjugations labeled 0 and L. In 0, 82% of the verbs are intransitive, and in L, 88% are transitive. And last we have Yidinj of northeast Queensland. Here we find the N and the L conjugations, and in N, 56% of the verbs are intransitive, a much lower percentage than up here, but still the majority of verbs in that conjugation. And in L, 80% are transitive. So yes, there is a correlation, but it is usually a statistical one. An absolute correlation is only found in a small number of languages. An absolute correlation where all the verbs in a conjugation, any given conjugation, have a specific transitivity value. MacGregor mentions 2 such languages in MacGregor 2002. 2 languages from southeast Queensland, the Murray languages Kunya and Margany. So Murray is a subgroup of the Pama-Nyungan language family. And I would also like to mention that Ngara and Nyamal of the Pilbara region of Western Australia may in fact also have an absolute correlation. I say may because when it comes to Ngara, there are a few verbs that I am unsure of. It looks as if the correlation in Ngara is absolute, but as I said, I'm unsure of a few verbs. So, this is all for today. In the next video about conjugations, I intend to talk about conjugation names and markers. So, see you later.